This is a typical New York City avenue. The New York City Sidewalk Cafe initiative has allowed us to take over a lane of traffic on either side and put in sidewalk cafes. Hi, I'm Sterling Plenert. I'm a restaurant and retail architect. I've worked on the design of all of these restaurants. Today I'm going to talk about restaurant design here in New York City with COVID restrictions. Before we get into the details of how restaurants have responded to the COVID virus, we need to get into the design of restaurants pre-COVID. New York City restaurants are long, narrow spaces typically because they're taking up the base of a tenement building. This is a typical New York City restaurant floor plan. They tend to be 20 to 25 foot wide, 60 to 80 foot long, and have many obstacles that reduce that width even further, including staircases, elevators, service doors, hallways, which can reduce the width down to roughly 15 feet. So then COVID hit. The typical restaurant that we just walked through suddenly lost all of its occupancy. So pre-COVID, a restaurant which had 40 persons able to dine in the restaurant has been reduced to 10 persons. They are, however, allowed to expand into a lane of traffic, which allows them to add 16 persons, depending on the size of their space. Pre-COVID, a restaurant's goal was to look full, to look inviting, to look like a space that a person wants to go and dine in. That's completely upended now. Now you need a place that looks safe to go, which is a different environment. You don't want a restaurant that's packed with people indoors. You want a restaurant that feels like they're taking your safety seriously, which means the outdoor dining is separated. In July of this year, New York City released guidelines for how a restaurant can expand onto the streets. This is New York City's guideline diagram. A building which has a frontage, which is the width of their storefront, can then do a restaurant out on the street for outdoor dining with some exceptions. So in the beginning, there were makeshift structures. So these restaurant designs are simple, quick, effective ways to define a space, simply created using construction pallets, tent structures to keep the weather out. Tables are spaced 6 feet apart. A raised floor allows for ADA access. Safety barrier elements that protect your patrons from traffic and the adjacent spaces. So the challenge of this first phase of outdoor sidewalk dining is that if you have a car directly adjacent to somebody sitting at a table having dinner, it's not a very nice environment. It doesn't feel like a safe, comfortable place to eat. You're mixing their exhaust smoke with your fine dining experience. Mayor de Blasio announced that sidewalk dining would become a permanent element of New York City. In this next phase, restaurateurs had figured out a couple ways to enhance their space very inexpensively, including adding landscaping along the perimeter barricades. This served the purpose of softening the structures as well as providing that respite from New York City traffic exhaust. Another one of the challenges of a New York City restaurant, the New York City street tends to be arced so that water drains into the gutters. And it's really not that pleasant to be at a table that's sitting on an angle. By adding a floor that's flush with the sidewalk, you end up with a straight flat surface that is ADA accessible and makes for a better dining experience. So these structures really only work in good weather. Nobody wants to sit out on the street when it's raining out. Sidewalk cafes have been very successful over the summer here in New York City, but now we're moving into the fall and winter months when the temperature is dropping. The question becomes, how do you winterize an outdoor sidewalk cafe while meeting the rules of COVID? So in New York City in winter, you're going to have rain coming from above. You're going to have wind blowing from the sides, water and ice and snow building up on the streets. So you're making a contained environment that shields you from these elements. We start adding elements like roofs, you end up adding walls, and then clear vinyl sheets. So what you have to be careful not to do is fully enclose the outdoor environment, basically building a building on the street. You need to keep at least 50% of your area of walls and ceilings open, usually one facade facing the restaurant. This gives you the dual purpose of getting the airflow, but also the people in the restaurant, servers, waitstaff, can see everybody in there and take care of them. They're not hidden behind a wall. If you fully enclose your outdoor dining space, it's no different than an indoor restaurant at that point. So in the case of this greenhouse type structure, this becomes indoor dining. New York City said you can do that on the street as well, but then you have to follow the rules of indoor dining. Tables need to be a certain distance apart. You only have 25% occupancy. So the goal of this next phase of sidewalk cafes, it's to make a pleasant experience of outdoor dining, similar to what you had pre-COVID indoor dining. It's to make it year-round dining, a space that people are comfortable going in midsummer or midwinter equally well. And it's basically to allow restaurateurs to have enough tables to keep in business to get through the end of this crisis. The outdoor dining initiative in New York City has been phenomenally successful. Prior to COVID, there were 24,000 restaurants approximately in New York City. Since New York City instituted the outdoor dining, over 10,000 of them have opened up outdoor dining spaces. Now I'm going to walk you through restaurant design pre and post-COVID. You start out on the street, storefront signage, that's your first experience of the restaurant. As you walk in, how you're greeted is your second part of the experience. Then you actually get to sit at your table and your experience is taken over by the food, the atmosphere, and the service in the restaurant. So post-COVID, the experience of walking up to a restaurant is very different. You need to socially distance. You've got your 6-foot space decals on the street. The dots that have been put on sidewalks and everything else around the city are fairly effective. When you come in, you no longer see diners right away. What you see is a host stand with takeout instructions. So you're picking up orders, having food to go. Part of the signage package that's involved in a restaurant now are things like face covering requirements, how you go to the bathroom in a restaurant, what the rules are when you're in the restaurant. So these photos are of restaurants, obviously pre-COVID, which show the activity, the interaction of people. The primary directive is to get the people at the tables that are able to be seen from the exterior. Food and beverages both look better under natural light. Post-COVID, you're going to have far fewer people. You're going to lose every other table here. Many restaurants have introduced signage on the tables, which includes things like QR codes for the menus. One of the main advantages to restaurants that this has brought out is they can now change their menu on a daily basis without having to reprint, reformat their menus. Everything's on the phones. So that's how the restaurant experience has changed post-COVID. Now I'm going to talk about the future of dining in New York City. So as we move into the next phase of sidewalk cafes, New York can learn a lot from European cities. While outdoor dining in New York City and taking back streets from vehicular traffic is something new for us, in Europe it's been happening for years. European cities have plazas, sidewalks, all filled with outdoor dining and seating situations. It's part of the urban fabric of those cities, and it's very successful. It makes the streets safer, it makes them more active, and it extends the life of those sidewalks and cafes further into the evening or earlier in the morning because it's part of the cityscape. So some of the things we can learn from European cities and how they interact with their outdoor dining is that it doesn't have to be an interference in the sidewalk or streetscape. In some cases, they've extended the storefront out onto the street or sidewalk. They've allowed it to be part of the restaurant, just an outdoor portion of it. And similar to what we're doing here in New York City, they've created platforms that are separate from the restaurant and the sidewalk goes between them. Some of the more successful restaurants have faced all of the seats towards the street. It becomes an interactive viewing, almost like theater. Some of the streets in Europe that are most famous for doing this are the Champs-Élysées in Paris or La Ramblas in Barcelona, where having sidewalk cafes and dining has not only become a draw for it, it's become a tourist attraction in its own right. One of the big design challenges in New York City is that we don't have service ways or alleyways behind the buildings. Any sidewalk cafes or outdoor dining that we design are going to have to compete with those services for space on the street. COVID has accelerated a program in New York City called Open Streets. Streets closed or mostly closed to vehicular traffic, opening them up for pedestrians and non-vehicular uses. New York City had 87 separate open street designations spread throughout the city. So this is what a New York City open street might look like. You've got sidewalk dining on either side, you've opened up to pedestrians. It becomes like a block party that's permanent. What the future might hold is a full greening of New York City, where it's not just closing down a couple streets and putting in painted plazas. You add greenscape, you add trees, you add landscaping, and New York City becomes a much greener and friendlier place to be. The overall effect of this would be turning avenues in New York City into linear parks, similar to the High Line. Going by the numbers, New York City restaurants are definitely in trouble due to COVID. They've been closed down for many months. Estimates are approximately 40% of the restaurants in New York City will not make it through this crisis. Architects and designers are assisting restaurants as quickly as possible to help them make these cafes work, make sidewalk cafes winterized and be able to work year-round, and become a permanent part of the New York City streetscape. COVID has obviously been a horrendous impediment to restaurants in New York City. However, there is a silver lining. Despite the tragedy of the disease, it has allowed us to help reshape the city and how residents and tourists visiting it interact with the environment.